for all of us to learn something from you. And so, I now give you, please lead the webinar, introduce yourself, and we can start.
Absolutely. First off, thanks so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've been part of the STEM Peers group for several months now, and although I don't post occasionally on the Facebook page, I do keep a track of things that are going on, and I do enjoy reading the posts. And I do feel that it's an extremely important platform for all of us to come together and engage, and even talk about such things as imposter syndrome and how it could lead to challenges and difficulties, especially when we apply for jobs, specifically when interviewing and social interactions and so on. I feel that as people with a background in science, we often feel imposter syndrome, but we kind of just keep that under wraps. But it can sometimes come up and become an obstacle, especially when we're transitioning from one chapter of our lives to the next. The most prominent one being, moving from an academic setting to an industry setting where we haven't really had a chance to understand our own imposter syndrome, and all of a sudden realize that it's become an obstacle. So a little bit about myself. I work as a medical writer, specifically a regulatory medical writer in a contract research organization called ParExcel, located in the greater Boston area. It's a global organization, and it's been an interesting opportunity to work there. I've been with the company for close to 3 years now. I'm also very grateful that this presentation here today has been blessed by people within the organization, and it's because of their belief in me and my ability to speak about these things. I'm extremely grateful that I have my company's support as well with this initiative. So thanks once again to STEM Peers, and thank you all of you for your time in joining me today in exploring a little bit about imposter syndrome. Okay. Can everyone see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. This was a topic which I've been thinking about for a while, but didn't know exactly how to present. I feel that it's important to talk about imposter syndrome within a specific context. It's kind of a fleeting topic, and I didn't know at the beginning how to approach it. So I decided to give imposter syndrome a contender, kind of pit imposter syndrome against something else which I needed to achieve. So I thought about a book that I had read called The Tale of Two Cities, and I just spun that a little bit, and I said, let me think about this as a tale of two contemplations. On one side, we have imposter syndrome, which I wanted to overcome, and on the other side, I had my dreams of becoming a medical writer. Although the working model that I've used here is within the context of medical writing, I feel that this is something which can be used in other respects as well. The knowledge that I'm going to share today can be utilized in other respects as well, not specifically within medical writing. I only chose to speak about this because it's a combination of a personal story plus the knowledge that I'm going to share today is based on feedback that I have received while working one-to-one with candidates who want to enter medical writing, as well as people who have had some time to come and have some small group discussions about imposter syndrome and how we can use methods to overcome that. So I really have to thank people who have given me permission to share their story, because this is, again, one of those topics which can only be shared within the context of a story. So even though I'm presenting this today, truly I'm representing everyone's story, and I'm very grateful to be able to do that. This topic was presented for the first time at the American Medical Writers Association annual conference. So for those of you listening who are interested in a career in medical writing, I urge you to have a look at this organization, AMWA, the American Medical Writers Association. And it was a pleasant surprise that they allowed me to present something like this as a roundtable discussion, which has now been adapted to a slide deck, which I will share with you today. We're going to go over 4 simple things today. First is to talk about these 2 contemplations, to talk about why I became interested in medical writing and the role that something like imposter syndrome has played as an obstacle in that process, in helping me, in preventing me initially from getting to my goal. We're also going to talk about core strengthening methods. I like to call this as core strengthening because I feel that unlearning imposter syndrome is kind of an inside-out approach. It has to begin with us as individuals, and we need to find a way of growing stronger from the inside out. So I like to think of it as core strengthening. I also like to touch upon a few thoughts and ruminations. I am deeply inspired by good writing and good poetry as well. So I try and infuse a little bit of that into something that I present. So a presentation is not complete, to me at least, if we don't talk about a few thoughts and ruminations which play a role in highlighting the topic that we're talking about. So we're going to touch upon that as well. And finally, a call to action, something that all of us can be doing in order to help people with imposter syndrome. So let's talk about the first of 2 contenders, dreams of becoming a medical writer. It was roughly halfway through grad school where I was earning a PhD in immunology that I realized that I really enjoyed communicating science. And I knew at the back of my mind that there was a career out there where people become science communicators, but I didn't know how prevalent it was. And I was genuinely excited to learn that there are so many medical writers out there, so many different types of different flavors of science communication out there, which could open up possibilities for the future in terms of career progress. So that was, I would say, one of the highlights of grad school for me was discovering that there was something out there which I could align my purpose with. But then again, I was also at a crossroads where I had invested so much time in research, specifically bench research, and all of a sudden this new direction comes along, medical writing. So I was wondering, is it something which I should pursue, or should I stick with something that I'm familiar with? And at this time, I reflected on something which was shared with me by one of my former coaches who was coaching me when I was training to be an athlete. And he would say, play to your strengths. Don't worry too much about your weaknesses as long as you're playing to your strengths. So I took that as something I need to focus on. And it just occurred to me that if communicating science is a strength, then I should certainly lean into that. This is also something which I share with people during small group discussions as well as one-on-one conversations. Just because we're doing something for 8 hours a day, that doesn't necessarily mean we're strong at that. We could be doing one activity for 5 minutes a day, which just makes us feel empowered, makes us feel connected, makes us feel as if we're totally in our element. That is our strength. So it's a matter of how it makes you feel and how it makes you feel powerful, and your ability to give to the world. That is your strength. Something which you're doing 8 hours a day is a skill, but it may not be a strength. So it's important to recognize that difference and lean toward our strengths. So that's one piece of advice which helped me out initially. Having realized this, I began having conversations with other medical writers and also using notes from those conversations to do a little bit of introspection to kind of concretize that medical writing was indeed something that I wanted to pursue. So the goal was set. I knew which job title I wanted. I knew the flavor of medical writing that I really wanted. Um, but there was um, an unanticipated obstacle along the way, and that was imposter syndrome. Um, I feel that it's not it's not an organic conversation to go up to someone and say, "Hey, do you have imposter syndrome?" You know, that kind of a conversation is just socially awkward and weird, and I wouldn't suggest opening a conversation like that ever. But I have done a little bit of research on imposter syndrome, and as someone with a background in science, I almost get like withdrawal symptoms if I don't present a slide with some definitions and a reference. So here's a slide with some definitions and a reference. Um, of all the papers that I've read, this one is something which sticks out to me because it explains imposter syndrome in such a clear way. And it also gives tools for me to rationalize imposter syndrome within myself and also explain it to others when I'm having small group conversations. These three definitions here are key in understanding imposter syndrome. These feelings over here is what upholds imposter syndrome and keeps it alive. So the first thing is that it's something which is chronic. It doesn't go away over a weekend. And despite abilities of us having the skills and the know-how in order to get something done, we tend to believe that we're not accomplished and incompetent and we lack skills. And overall, it's based on a belief that we are less intelligent or less competitive than people perceive us to be. I've underlined three key words here: chronic, evidence, and belief. And I've done this because I like to explain imposter syndrome to people using the fire analogy, which goes that in order to build a fire, you need three key things. You need heat, you need oxygen, and you need something that burns. If two of these things are present and the third component is missing, you don't get a fire. Imposter syndrome is much the same thing. The feeling has to be chronic if there's evidence of abilities, but and if it's a belief-based system, then that's imposter syndrome. Sometimes I get questions from people saying, if I'm nervous before an exam or if I'm nervous before an interview, is that imposter syndrome? Sometimes people ask me if I'm nervous before I get married, is that imposter syndrome? So something like this, which gives me the cornerstones, so to speak, of asking questions such as, is this something which is chronic? Can you share examples of evidence where you have strengths in these abilities? Do you feel that this is a belief, or is this something which is this something which you have constructed on your own, or is it based on some kind of negative feedback that you're receiving? So asking these kinds of questions and helping people understand what they might be going through has really helped in explaining imposter syndrome both to myself as well as initiating conversations about imposter syndrome with others. The other thing which has really helped is this quote here, which says, "It's not who you are that holds you back, it's who you think you're not." Although there's literature out there about imposter syndrome and how to make sense of it, sometimes reading a quote is hits harder than reading a scientific definition. So I like to approach this from both sides. One is to talk about the science of imposter syndrome, and the other is to just use a statement like this that says, it's not who you are that holds you back, it's who you think you're not. And using statements like this really helps build a sense of resonance with people and really helps in opening up the conversation about imposter syndrome. So this has been a very effective tool as well. So as far as overcoming imposter syndrome is concerned, let's just cut to the chase. The first step, which I've seen as very important, is to recognize that imposter syndrome is a natural phenomenon. As natural as anything else. It's almost like it's as natural as, something like hair growth. It happens. And in order to overcome this, it's important to perform structured and disciplined hands-on work to unlearn imposter syndrome. There are many keywords over here, so let's talk about them one at a time. What we do in order to overcome imposter syndrome has to be structured. It cannot be a random activity. We all know what structured work means because as people with a background in science, we have been doing structured work for years and years. Everything we do is structured. We approach something with a plan. We follow up. We go about it in a disciplined way. And it's hands-on. So using the same kind of rigor and discipline that goes into pushing projects forward and driving scientific experiments forward, that same level of etiquette and discipline is required in overcoming imposter syndrome. Because we need to unlearn this thing. We cannot sit down and unthink imposter syndrome. It has to be unlearned. And in order to unlearn something, it's very important to do some hands-on work. So what does this look like? In order to see what this looks like, I'd like to share with you 4 aspects of what core strengthening looks like. The first is self-directed learning. The second is seeking stories. The third is structured outreach. And the fourth is adding value and earning visibility. Before I go on to these techniques, I just wanted to pause here and ask if there were any questions or if anyone would like to share any feedback.
So I don't see any questions, though at this point, I think it's a good time to, let other panelists know that, feel free to use the Q&A portal of Zoom. If you have any questions, I think this is a fantastic topic, and, just feel free. It's a very close-knit community, and we should be able to, get to some of the thoughts which are probably, which you have, these are some of the things which I think every one of us can relate to. And if you have any questions, just feel free to shoot. Okay, somebody says, like the code, that one's going to stick with me. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Nisha.
All right, let's move on.
So Anand, I have one question. So how do you,
Sure.
you told, the 4 traits, the traits which defines imposter syndrome, but what, when did you realize that you also suffer from imposter syndrome, and how did you identify that you have all those traits?
I think it was because of some reading that I was doing, and I was actually in a volunteering opportunity where we were helping some local businesses build their marketing portfolios. So it was kind of a volunteering opportunity where they would get together for a couple of hours a day for a week and help local companies in understanding exactly what it is they do and communicate their science to pretty much anyone who lands on their website, or find ways of leveraging the excitement which is going on within the organization to promote them on social media and so on. And when I was in that volunteering opportunity, I heard someone use this term. And I didn't know exactly what it meant at the time, but it was interesting enough for me to follow up on it. And when I began reading about it, initially I was reading a lot of blogs on imposter syndrome. So it's kind of just circling around imposter syndrome, but not specifically finding a definition for it, because still it was based on people sharing experiences as opposed to trying to define it in any way. So one day I just thought, why not just use a scientific database like PubMed or Google Scholar to look at imposter syndrome and see if anything comes up. And I was just pleasantly surprised to see so many sources on this. Not only just studies which talk about it, but also studies which try to measure it in different populations, in different communities, and also studies which try and make an association between predisposition to imposter syndrome and other things such as past traumatic incidents, personality types, um, and those kinds of association studies as well. So it's a growing field, and very interesting. Although at the moment there are no hard metrics. Like for instance, if you want to know your blood sugar, you would use a drop of blood, and that's a hard metric. So for imposter syndrome, it's mostly a self-reported metric at the moment. So it's not yet evolved to a stage where it can be considered a hard science. But still, I think it's important to begin this conversation and see where it leads, because the one thing I know is, although there isn't a hard definition of imposter syndrome, scientifically speaking, I have learned through experience and working with others that anyone can overcome it. Imposter syndrome is certainly a strong feeling, but we are stronger. A person who's suffering it is stronger than the imposter syndrome. And as long as the person is committed to strengthening their core and finding ways to overcome it, it's absolutely possible. Anyone can overcome it.
Great. We have another question from Rituparna. What does chronic mean? Is there a frequency or some signs?
Very simply put, it means something which you have been feeling over an extended period of time, probably months to years. Acute would be days to weeks. Chronic is months to years. That would be the definition from the medical literature, which I'm applying here. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. All right. You're most welcome. Okay. First, let's talk about a little bit of self-directed learning, beginning with the question of what is a medical writing resource. Again, I'd mentioned earlier that this topic is, put within the context of medical writing. So much of my references are going to come from there. When I ask this question to people, most people say it's a document, a web page, a blog, or a course. All these responses are very accurate, but one of the interesting answers that I've received is that it's a community. What is a resource? A community can be a resource. People have all kinds of information shaped by what they've read, what they've seen, what they've experienced. A person is like a living, breathing document, living, breathing web page, blog, and course, everything wrapped up in one. So when going to seek information, why not just approach a person? I think that as people with who have been in science for a while, we tend to assume that when you want some information, the first place to go is the written text, something which is already out there, something which is published, something which you can put your finger on and say, here, look, it's written down there. And that's fine. I think that we've been conditioned that way for a while, but it's also important to recognize the value of getting information from a conversation. So this is something which I encourage people to do. The very first thing, either during one-on-one conversations or in small group settings, people say, what's the first thing that I can be doing in attempting to overcome this feeling, is to just talk to people. Reach out. Don't talk to them specifically about imposter syndrome, but talk to them about where you'd like to go in the future. Ask them questions about them, learn about them, and just talk to people about where you'd like to go in the future. And also become a resource. Here are some methods of becoming a resource. Becoming a resource sounds intimidating. It sounds as if it's a difficult goal to accomplish, but it really boils down to just a few simple things, such as help a member in your community find a resource, help someone find information, teach yourself that you are capable of helping someone find a resource. When you help someone, you're really training the mind to believe in its own strength. And that little thought of training the mind of believing in its own strength plays a huge role in taking that first step toward overcoming imposter syndrome. The second is to describe your experience with the course. If you've scrolled through social media lately, specifically LinkedIn, you'll see a lot of people uploading their course certificates saying, I have completed some course in, let's say, GCP or ICH, or it could be anything. programming, whatnot. It could be anything. In addition to uploading a course certificate, for instance, write a short blurb about how you felt in that course. 2 or 3 bullet points as to what you took away from it and how someone else can connect to it. Or help organize an event. This is a huge one. This is a big one. Sometimes when we're having one-on-one sessions and people ask me, imposter syndrome is really weighing me down. What can I do? And I tell them, have you considered organizing an event? And people always ask me, what does that have anything to do with overcoming imposter syndrome? How can that even be a technique? We're talking about overcoming a feeling, and you're talking to me about organizing an event. How are they even connected? To be honest with you, I don't know how they're connected scientifically, but what I do know that putting yourself through such exercises, such as helping someone find a resource, describing what a course meant for you and how it has built you up as an individual and what you know now compared to a few months ago, and also helping organize an event, can just go leaps and bounds in terms of taking those important steps in overcoming imposter syndrome. And if you're wondering, how can I organize an event at a time like this when there's social distancing and stay-at-home orders and sheltering in place and so on, now is a great time because people are glued to their devices more now than ever before. It's easy to engage people online now more than ever. If you call someone, they're probably going to pick up because they're glued to that device anyway. Help organize an event, create an event, and just bring people together. It doesn't have to be big. It can be 5 people, 6 people, anything that you can do in order to talk about promoting a cause that you believe in. It could be something related to the science that you're working on or something unrelated to it. Just organize an event and see the impact that has on how you feel about processing your own feelings about imposter syndrome. The second most important method is to seek stories from people in the community. One of the very important things about medical writing is that listening is a very, very important skill, and also asking the right questions. And here are 2 very important questions which I feel need to be asked but don't get asked as often. The first is, what kind of work were you involved in earlier? And the second is, what brings you into this field? Questions which talk about where the person was earlier in their career path and how that transition went. When I speak with people and I ask them, I often introduce people to medical writers, and I often introduce candidates to medical writers, and I always follow up with the candidates and I ask them, how did the informational interview go? What questions did you ask? And the questions are mostly very good and practical questions, like, what is a typical day like in the role? What do you do? What do you do besides what's already mentioned in the job description? Any perks? Any tips? Any hint? Clues or advice that you can give me, and so on. Very practical questions. But I think that 9 out of 10 candidates miss these questions. What kind of work were you involved in earlier, and what brings you into this field? These questions are important because it helps you get a sense of overlap between your own life and the person you're speaking with. One of the mistakes that I have made in my career earlier is that I was asking for advice. And I quickly realized that advice is like a pair of shoes. It either fits or it doesn't. Your shoe size is not negotiable. If you go to a store and ask for a size 8 and they say, I have a size 5, you're not going to buy it. It has to be the right size. The same is true of advice, but we spend a lot of time implementing advice which doesn't fit because we have missed the basic questions. We have missed that opportunity to analyze the level of overlap between ourselves and the person we're speaking with. If there's a higher level of overlap, then it would make sense to take that advice and try to implement it. Otherwise, the advice could be completely off target, but we end up implementing it anyway because we have spent so much effort in trying to get that advice. So when speaking with people, remember these key conversational questions and begin to analyze the level of overlap. It's only when you begin to analyze the level of overlap that you tell yourself that if this person can make it happen, then there's a possibility that I can make it happen too. I'd like to share a story about this. For the longest time, I was having informational interviews with other medical writers who were giving me all kinds of advice. And some of them would say, just go ahead and do an internship, do some volunteering work, do this, do that. These very broad strokes kind of plans, which I could either implement or sometimes I couldn't implement them. But I came across a medical writer who had a very similar story to me, because this person moved to the United States from Vietnam, received a PhD in the United States, began working as a medical writer in a CRO, and then began working as a medical writer at a pharma company, and is now at the directorial level within that pharma company. And I found many regions of overlap between my story and this other person in terms of coming to the United States from another country, becoming interested in medical writing, pursuing that interest, working in a CRO, and so on. So it's very important to take a step back and get a sense of the level of overlap and see how much stories can connect. And for new entrants and transitioning writers, I strongly recommend mock interviewing. One of the surprising things I've found is that when I'm working in a small group and with let's say 2 or 3 other people, and we're talking about imposter syndrome, we're talking about these methods, we're talking about keeping notes on what methods have worked and what methods have not worked. I often ask them to mock interview each other. You don't have to be a hiring manager in order to interview someone. You can be anyone. You can interview a friend, interview a colleague, set this up. Now is a good time again, because everyone is glued to their devices. Now is a great time to try this method of mock interviewing. You don't have to be in the job search process to mock interview. Do it anyhow and learn a little bit about something, about the way you're presenting yourself. There's no bad time for a mock interview. And this is a very underutilized technique and also a very powerful technique. And one of the very interesting things that I've noticed is that in the small group sessions, when I ask 2 people who recognize imposter syndrome in themselves to mock interview each other, over the course of time, both of them end up feeling a sense of confidence. Both end up feeling a sense of feeling uplifted. There's a sense of belief in their own abilities, a sense of belief in their own competitive spirit and intelligence level and their backgrounds. So you don't have to be an expert in order to interview someone. You can be anyone asking questions to the other person. Mock interviewing is important because we often do self-interviews sometimes. We ask questions of ourselves in the mind, and we figure out ways in which those questions can be answered. But there's a huge difference between doing a self-interview versus a mock interview with another individual. It adds another layer of realism to it. So I would strongly encourage this approach as well. It's just insanely powerful. And all I can say is absolutely give it a shot. Talking about structured outreach, one of the techniques which has really helped is to create a purpose statement. Many of us created purpose statements, during that time when we had to apply for college or grad school for the first time. They ask us to write something called a statement of purpose, which is to explain to the admissions committee, for instance, why you deserve to be in that university or why you deserve to be in that position. So this was done within the context of getting into a program, getting into an educational program. But we generally don't perform this for any other purpose. So one thing which I like to encourage people to do is to create a purpose statement when you recognize imposter syndrome within yourself. It doesn't have to be extensive. It can be 300 words, 500 words, anything. Write a few things about your strengths, about your abilities. Think about your dream role and compose something, compose a purpose statement in order to align yourself with that dream role. Sometimes we do this within the context of a cover letter, but then again, writing a cover letter can be a time-pressed process, a stressful process, because the job is on your mind. When you write a cover letter, the job is on your mind. You just tell yourself that I have to find a way of making this work. But when you're not specifically looking for a job and you write a purpose statement anyway, it's really a self-empowerment exercise. And it helps a lot. And it helps in recognizing contributions and potential. And this truly is an exercise to talk to the mind. And this is something which we have to do often, because if it is true that imposter syndrome is a self-constructed thing, then there's nothing stopping us from talking to the mind and saying, look at this piece of paper where I have listed 3 things about myself that I'm proud of, 3 achievements which I've accomplished with hard work. It took time, it took effort, it took discipline, it took precision, it took teamwork, and I've done all that. So this is really an exercise to talk to the mind, and I would strongly encourage that we try this. It doesn't have to be extensive, it doesn't have to be long. Even 100 words, for instance, can make a difference. And you don't have to share this with anyone. This is just for you to read and reflect upon once in a while.
Right. Sorry, I will just. So I think this is a great point, and sorry to interject in between. And one of the things I know, one of the Gurukul mentors, Raghu, always mentions, and he was speaking with me when I was trying to, going through some of these issues, and one of the advices he gave was, why don't you talk to people whom you have made, where you have had some contribution to their life or to their career or something like that, right? Because I'm sure a lot of us are interacting with so many other people, right? And you might have influenced some people in some way, right? And so when you are self-doubting, one way to get through that is to talk to people who actually knows your value, right? And then just to self boost yourself. So that I think is also a good addition to what you proposed here, which is write down or talk to your mind that what are the 3 contributions, what are some of the potential things you identified yourself which can create value to wherever you are.
Absolutely. It's very interesting that you mentioned that. Thank you for mentioning that. Initially, when I was having one-on-one sessions with people in talking about imposter syndrome, I would recommend that method of speaking with people who have benefited because of your presence. Identify people in your life. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be it could be someone who's close to you within your own family. Just talk to them. And the strangest thing is that this feeling of self-doubt is so strong that I would follow up with this person after having recommended this method. I would follow up with this person week after week after week, and still there was no phone call. There was no attempt by this person to reach out to someone whose life had been impacted by them, because the self-doubt was so strong that they were questioning themselves in making that phone call to someone. They were saying, so I would hear feedback like, this person doesn't want to talk to me, or it's been a while and they're busy, I don't want to disturb them. So that's when I kind of took it down a notch and say, okay, if the communication approach is not working, let's at least begin with creating a purpose statement, and then elevate that method a little bit to perhaps making a phone call to someone, or writing an email to someone, or having a conversation with someone. But I completely agree with you that the technique you talked about of speaking with someone whom has benefited from your presence definitely goes a long way. Moving on to the next method, which I think is really interesting, is to self-publish an article. And one of the reasons why this is so powerful is that self-publishing requires self-permission. The thing about imposter syndrome and self-doubt is that we tend to not give ourselves permission for so many things. The word can't becomes so prevalent in the language of imposter syndrome that we're constantly telling ourselves, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't communicate, I can't write. the one way of resolving that is to give yourself self-permission. And since all of us are free to write things, why not self-publish an article? Now, as people with backgrounds in science, the word publish can sometimes bring up thoughts of a long drawn process where you got to do the data mining, the research, you put together a manuscript, which is then subjected to many rounds of review. You have internal reviews, external reviews. There's always that one reviewer who's fine, and then they suddenly come back with some comments. So sometimes this can be, an unpleasant process. And so the word publish can almost become a trigger word because of the kind of the marathon-like task which it has become. But there's, as far as writing something and sharing it with the world, it's not that kind of a complicated process. It's as simple as writing something down and clicking the publish button. Writing something down, spell check, grammar check, click the publish button. It's as simple as that. And for those individuals who are comfortable with creating a purpose statement and comfortable with writing, this is something that I recommended, is to self-publish an article. Again, it doesn't have to go into pages and pages. It doesn't have to be like a polished New York Times article. Just a little something which gives you a chance to tell the world that here is a small contribution. I have the power to contribute. I have the power to write, the power to contribute, and the power to send out this message to the rest of the world. And it doesn't have to be writing. It doesn't have to be text. Consider different platforms like videos, podcasts, etc. My initial intention of starting a YouTube channel about medical writing had, some elements of trying to overcome imposter syndrome as well. And I initially thought that I would create 3 videos and stop. The first video would be a little something about medical writing. The second video would be how, my journey into medical writing. And the third one would be future prospects. And I thought that would be it. So I filmed those and sent it out to a few friends, and they sent it out to a few of their friends. And all of a sudden, I was getting so many questions. I was just flooded with questions in my inbox, asking me to answer questions about medical writing, about different flavors of medical writing, how to get into the field, future prospects, and so on. And that really gave me an idea to expand that idea out into something that could be presented to a larger audience. And that's how the YouTube channel came about. So again, going back to publishing, it doesn't necessarily mean you're sharing it with everyone out there. You can share it with 10 people, and that's still an example of publishing. The other thing which I've found is really interesting is to write an opinion piece. Anyone can give an opinion. You don't have to be an expert to give an opinion. And I'd like to share with you, these 2 articles that I'm working on. I mean, I'm not working on them on my own, but I'm overseeing the work of writers. One of them, it doesn't have any experience in medical writing, but wants to get into medical writing. And he's writing an article called 5 Reasons Why I Think Medical Writing is Here to Stay. So talking about the longevity of a career in medical writing and how medical writing is really the backbone of clinical development. Keep in mind that this person doesn't have a background in medical writing, but there's nothing stopping him from writing this article. All it requires is to do some research on the field, think about the relevance of this field to clinical research and to progressing biomedical sciences, and to construct sentences and to structure it in the form of a catchy blog. And it even has a catchy title, 5 Reasons Why I Think Medical Writing is Here to Stay. Think about something like this appearing on your social media feed. You're definitely going to click on it. I know it for a fact you're going to click on it. So think about writing an opinion piece. It really helps in taking that one step toward reassuring yourself in your own abilities and intelligence, and taking that one step toward overcoming imposter syndrome. And the other interesting articles is 10 reasons why I find HEOR fascinating. HEOR is Health Economics Outcomes Research. Google the term. It's a very interesting and upcoming field, health economics outcomes research. And this is written by someone who is in the medical communications field, who wants to transition into the HEOR field. And this is, again, an article that she and I are working on. 10 reasons why I find HEOR fascinating. Again, no prior experience, but just a crazy amount of drive to talk about it and to learn more about it. So consider this method as well. Volunteering is a huge plus in overcoming imposter syndrome. I find that this is perhaps one of the most powerful techniques. The reason why this technique didn't, the reason why I didn't mention this earlier on is that sometimes it can take a lot of effort to volunteer or even to convince someone to volunteer, because there are other hurdles which have to be crossed. So I like to think of this as something which can possibly come later in the process, after you've written a purpose statement, after you have shared something with the world, after you have found a way to give something back to yourself and recognize your own strengths, then volunteering might open up to you. The other option, of course, is to just try and jump into it and see what comes up, see what happens. And for anyone listening who's interested in volunteering, especially within writing, foundations are always looking for writers. The thing about foundations is that sometimes they may not have the financial backing in order to publicize the fact that they're looking for a writer, because to have something out there on a website like Indeed or LinkedIn or the recruiting websites, that requires money in order to keep that job posting up there. So volunteering opportunities require a little bit more digging around, because these organizations may not have the financial backing to publicize those opportunities as often. Sometimes it just comes down to looking at the website, calling them up or sending an email, introducing yourself and saying, I'm someone with a background in science. I'm interested in pursuing a career in writing, specifically science writing or medical writing, and I was wondering if your organization would benefit from a volunteer like myself. And you might be pleasantly surprised with the response that you get. So look at some foundations. It could be a cause that you believe in, like, for instance, if you're doing some research on Alzheimer's disease, for instance, look at an Alzheimer's disease foundation and see if they need a volunteer. This could really be something which could even tie in to your to progression within your scientific career. Also consider helping with test preparation or certification. If you know someone who's taking a test which you've already taken, or if you find out about someone who's involved in a certification program which you've already taken, just help them out. I came across an interesting story about a training program for Marines in the United States Navy, where they go through this obstacle course. And the person who finishes the obstacle course can either just stand around and appreciate their own victory, or they have the option of going back and helping someone through the obstacle course. So this is much the same thing. If you have been through a hurdle, if you've been through if you've gotten through a test or a certification, there's nothing stopping you from going back and helping someone out. And this is something which has been extremely useful as well. To share a story with you, there's something called the BELS exam, a basic editor in life sciences, BELS. And I was speaking with an editor who just finished the BELS exam, and I told her, now that you've finished it, just post a message on your social media saying, I just finished the exam. And if there's anyone out there who's preparing for this exam, reach out to me and I'll help you get through the exam. And she was just overwhelmed with the amount of responses that came in. So there are people out there who need your help right now, but they don't know how to reach out to you unless you tell them. So tell them, if you've finished something, if you've gotten through an obstacle, if you've gotten through something, just let people know, I just finished this course, I just got done with this exam, I just got done with this certification. Let me know if you need any help. The other very interesting thing, which I've also tried personally, is to start something called a B team. In order to understand what a B team is, let's talk about what the A team does. Now, the A team is a group of individuals who are experts in their field. And there used to be a TV show called the A Team, where a group of experts would come together. There's a mission. Every episode had a mission, so they would meet in a boardroom, discuss the mission, talk about how each of their skills could be utilized, talk about each of their contributions in accomplishing that mission, and then go out and use all their techniques and expensive equipment in order to accomplish this mission. And mission accomplished, and that's how the episode would end. But the B team is a group of people who just have this passion, who have this crazy drive of doing something. Maybe not experts in the field, but just fueled entirely by a crazy drive in order to start a project and get something done. So that's an interesting approach to take as well, because you're helping one another in taking that one step towards self-empowerment. And one step towards self-empowerment was one step away from imposter syndrome. That's another important thing to keep in mind. When I was in the first year of my medical writing role at Parexel, I just became interested in this concept called real-world evidence, RWE. But I didn't know exactly what to do with that interest. It was like this fire which was kind of growing within me. So I reached out to people within the organization, and we decided to form kind of a B team where none of us really knew exactly how to go about this, but we were leveraging each other's excitement, each other's drives, each other's strengths in different respects. And it kind of snowballed into an abstract, which then snowballed into a poster. Once it was a poster, we reached out to the marketing team, and they made it look absolutely fabulous. And we actually presented that in Vienna at the European Medical Writers Conference. So you never know where a B team can lead you. And even now, I'm actually involved in a different B team. We are putting together a STEM education-based children's book, which explains science, and with some very cool illustrations, teaching kids about the importance of STEM education. So again, I'm not an expert in the field, and I don't think anyone on the team is an expert in the field, but we just have this drive to get something done, and we're supporting each other in any way we can in order to get this project done. So here's an interesting visibility exercise, is to put yourself in the picture. Putting yourself in the picture really means when you share something with someone, whether it's on social media or somewhere else, don't just share an article or a blog or anything like that without saying something about it. To give you an example, when I was hunting for medical writing roles, I would share articles along with a little blurb that said, as an aspiring medical writer, I find this article interesting because of the following 3 reasons. And I would put 3 simple bullet points as reasons why I find the article interesting. Same thing with a video or a podcast or anything else, whether you're sharing it via email or sharing it on social media. Make sure you include a little something about why you're sharing it. And that really helps in putting yourself in the picture. And it kind of circles back to the technique we talked about earlier of talking to the mind. And the kind of unforeseen benefit to this was that I was getting a lot of attention from recruiters, because there's a huge difference between just sharing an article versus sharing it and then saying, as an aspiring medical writer, I'm sharing this article because of the following reasons. So people would look at that little blurb and they would say, okay, this is well composed, well written, and this person says he's an aspiring medical writer. Maybe I should reach out to this person. So think about that. Think about the value you're adding to your community, to your network, by sharing a little bit about why you're sharing that. So coming back to what overcoming imposter syndrome is all about, the first, again, is to recognize that it's a natural phenomenon. During one of our small group discussions, a very interesting analogy that came up, which I want to share with you, is that recognizing imposter syndrome as a natural phenomenon is like figuring out how a magician does their trick. If you don't know how the trick is done, you're just kind of surprised and taken aback by it, and you're questioning yourself, how did that happen? How did they find the card that I was thinking about? How did that happen? But when you know the technique behind it, when you know that it's a sleight of hand, when you know how the rabbit comes out of the hat, you're just like, okay, I know how it happens. It's natural. I know it. So recognizing that imposter syndrome is a natural phenomenon is a lot like that. When you know that this is probably something which is self-constructed, maybe a trick that your mind is playing on you, then it's so much easier to be kind to yourself, to be kind to your own mind and say, okay, this is something natural. It happens. And there are techniques. There are hands-on techniques that I can implement right now. I have the power to implement these techniques in order to unlearn imposter syndrome. So let's talk about rethinking imposter syndrome before we wrap up here. So in the literature, imposter syndrome is abbreviated as IS. And I was wondering, what else can IS stand for? And it occurred to me that IS could be immersion strategy. Every technique we've talked about so far is an example of an immersion strategy. Putting yourself in the picture, helping someone out, self-publishing an article, writing a purpose statement, writing an opinion piece, these are all immersion strategies. And what we're looking for here is to replace one IS with another. And as long as we're working towards techniques and working towards methods in a structured and disciplined way of replacing one IS with another, believe me, imposter syndrome will leave. And you will take those active steps towards self-empowerment, and you will be taking those active steps towards overcoming imposter syndrome. Now let's talk about some ruminations, a few quotes and a few statements which really help in putting all of this into the picture. Here's one which I often use when beginning a conversation about imposter syndrome. A mind with the power to build an obstacle has the power to break it down. If we built it, we can take it down. There's nothing stopping us from doing it. It's important to stay disciplined, and it's important to recognize that this imposter syndrome can be unlearned, because learning it is something that we did unintentionally. So unlearning it is something that we can do intentionally. If we built it up, we can break it down. Speaking of breaking it down, it's not a contest, it's not a race, it's not an exam. It's a process. So growth is a process. So there's sometimes people ask me, okay, I'm going to implement these techniques. Give me an estimate as to how long it's going to take for me to recover from this. And I just tell them, growth is a process. Sometimes it happens sooner. Sometimes it takes a little bit more effort. With some candidates, they do one self-immersion activity and boom, all of a sudden, they're just confident all of a sudden. With others, it takes maybe 2 or 3 different activities until they get to one which makes them feel absolutely in their element. And then they begin to come out of their shell and begin to take those steps towards self-empowerment. And the final call to action before we wrap up. Here's something that I like to begin my day with. I always like to look at this before I even check my emails or begin my workday. Build someone up. Put their insecurities to sleep. Remind them that they're worthy. Tell them they're incredible. And be a light in a too often dim world. If you have crossed that obstacle of taking one step toward overcoming imposter syndrome, go back and help someone else. Go back into the obstacle course. Help someone cross that bridge. Help someone jump over that fence. Help someone get over those ropes. Do anything that you can. Don't wait for permission to go and help someone. If you have been through the obstacle yourself, just go back and help someone else. There's nothing stopping us from doing it. We are capable. We are confident. We are self-empowered people. And let's put that to good use. So thank you for your time and stay strong.
Fantastic. I think, that was a fantastic webinar I've heard in a long time. And I think this is so very useful, not only for, 2023 people who attended this, but I think for the entire STEMPeers and organizations like STEMPeers who are working, for PhDs and postdocs, and there are so many of them now. Very nicely, explained. And I can't help myself but to bring in a lot of the things which we did since 2015 in STEM peers were not very structured, as you mentioned, like building B teams or helping others, or reach out to others to help, right? I mean, don't even wait for other people to seek help, right? And a lot of these ideas were put into the organization, and a lot of our other platforms like Gurukul or Sairai were based on these core philosophies, except that we never kind of structured it into or never thought about it, that okay, this is what we did, right? And I think people who are attending the webinars, or or anybody who attends this webinar should use some of these opportunities wherever they are involved in, like in whatever organizations, be it universities, be it other career development offices, or organizations like Stempiers, or some other related organizations. So I think these are very critical points that you brought up. But thanks very much. I think we have a couple of minutes for a few questions, so please feel free to ask if you have any questions you have for Anand. So we are getting a lot of so I can give you a lot of comments. I don't know about questions. What an absolutely wonderful webinar, Anand. Thank you so much. Probably you are also able to see those. Darpan Chakravarti writes, thank you, Anand. It was exceptional and very well put. Gargi says, thank you. I missed the first part. Yeah, we have recorded this and we will share it quite widely. If Anand does not have any problem with it, I will be happy to share it on Stempiers. And probably
sure, absolutely.
We will invite him again when he comes up with some amazing webinars. Yeah, Mansi says that was an amazing talk. Thank you so much. Yeah. So I think that, thanks very much, Anand, for putting together this beautiful presentation, and really appreciate the help and the time.
Absolutely, you're most welcome. It's been an honor to bring this to the STEMPeers community, and I hope that more people within the STEMPeers community are able to watch this.
Yeah. Also, we do have one question where somebody has asked, could you elaborate more on what kind of foundations that needs writers?
Well, I can give you examples of I can give you one example of somewhere I have worked in the past. So this was called the Altermed Research Foundation. This was a remote opportunity, ALTERMED, Altermed. And the interesting thing about this organization is that it looks at the crossroads of conventional medicine and alternative medicine. As someone who grew up in India, alternative medicine is something which I saw very often, even in my own house. It's like home remedies and stuff like that, which may or may not have a scientific backing, but there has to be funding in order to find out that those techniques really have that scientific backing. So this was one of those foundations which explored that intersection and funded researchers who were doing research on these kinds of alternative medicine techniques. And that's something which I was just fascinated by, because talking about alternative medicine using the same biochemical language, using the same kind of experiments that we talk about when we look at biomedical research, some of the same techniques that we use in the lab day in and day out were now being used to look at these alternative techniques. And they were looking for someone who would help them put together a newsletter, which would come out, I think, once every 4 months or once every 6 months. So I was working on that for a while. I volunteered there for a year. And in addition to the writing itself, I learned so much about client communication skills, about how to reach out to people you've never reached out to before, email etiquette, conversation etiquette, so many interesting things which you can learn with a simple opportunity like that. And that's something which I found on a volunteer website, and I just reached out to them with a cold call. So I encourage you to keep your mind open to such opportunities. And sometimes foundations don't know. They're looking for someone until you reach out to them. Sometimes they don't know exactly what it is because, again, a foundation can be as small as 5 people in a room who just have this drive to make the world a better place. And when they get an email from someone like yourself who says, I have a background in science and I want to help you, it's just fascinating. They might get back to you and say, we had never thought that we would get an email from someone like yourself, but now that you want to volunteer your time in helping us bring this message to the world, welcome aboard. Let's see how we can work together. So just reach out to them. The possibilities are limitless.
Awesome. I think fantastic, Anand. Thanks very much. This was, this was probably one of the most memorable webinars which I attended. So really appreciate again your time, and hopefully we'll see you soon in future webinars.
Absolutely, you're most welcome. And before I go, just one final thank you to everyone who attended, as well as to you, the entire STEMPeers community, and also special thanks to the people who I worked with in the past, either in group sessions or one-on-one sessions, who have given me permission to share their stories with them. So thanks so much.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you guys for attending the webinar. Yeah, do share your feedbacks on SalesG. I think it will be good for Anand and also, for the group also. If you are taking something, if you are taking some knowledge out of this webinar, feel free to share it and practice whatever Anand suggested right now. Where, as you help, in order to help others who probably have missed this webinar. Okay, see you guys on the next webinar. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.